All right, we're going to call this one High School English. What are we even doing here? I'm shooting this video for three reasons. The first reason is that I think that it could help a lot of new teachers in the classroom this year. The second one is I think it's worth discussing some of these ideas with a lot of veteran teachers who might see the video. And the third one is that I have a lot of other videos I'd like to shoot, and this one helps me lay groundwork for those videos. My premise is this. I think that a lot of new teachers are going to walk into the pre-service in-servicing this year a few days before the rest of the staff, and they're going to be given thick binders full of standards and expectations and some slightly thinner binders that are full of curriculum guides. And they're going to start pouring through this and start recognizing how big the task of teaching high school English is. And as soon as they come in the second or third day, they're going to be set up with a mentor teacher. And that mentor teacher is going to say, here's what's really the most important. And they're going to get a finer point on their idea of what they should be doing to teach this year. But then the whole staff in servicing will start. And they will recognize that their superintendent has one vision for the district with a whole bunch of goals, and that their principal has another vision for the district with a whole bunch of goals, and the district technology czar has a vision for the district, and there's a whole lot of technology goals. And then they're going to go to a department meeting, and they're going to hear about department goals from their department head and then expectations from their fellow teachers. And then by the time they get home the night before school begins, they're going to have somewhere between 40 and 160 major goals for the year, and their head will be spinning and they'll have no idea what to do. The truth of the matter is that with all of these bosses to please and all of these expectations to meet, a teacher could make a checklist of all of these goals for the year, and they could work arduously, and they could pore over their list every evening and every weekend, and they could make lesson plans, and they could meet all of these goals. They could check off all of these checklist items. And at the end of the year, they could look back and think, you know what? I didn't teach English very well, and my students didn't become better readers and writers, and we met the goals on paper, but I'm not satisfied with the experience that I had. And so my message for these teachers and for you teachers who are veterans watching and for you administrators who might pick up the video is that teaching high school English should be simple. We should help students read, and they should read widely, and they should read deeply, and they should read sustainedly, and they should finish a class, and they should have read some things that they liked, and they should like reading. And students should write, and students should write in a number of modes, and students should write short pieces, and students should write at length, and students should write personally, academically, and for future business interests. And students should speak, and students should speak in small groups, and they should speak in large groups, and they should speak individually before the class, and they should speak in groups before the class. And in the modern age, students should probably put together electronic presentations like the one I'm putting together right now, where they present in video format. If we did all of those three things each year as high school English teachers, I think that we ought to be able to call ourselves successful whether or not we checked off all the boxes for all of the entities that have all these expectations for us. Just to track back on these three goals really briefly, I think a high school English class is a special place where students get to learn to think more deeply, and they get to learn to communicate with others and collaborate with others. And I think that in our human society, though we have smartphones and tablets and MacBooks, the best technologies we have are still the written word and the simple devices that help us produce the written word. And it's the task of the high school English teacher to help students, one, think more deeply as individuals, and two, having thought more deeply as individuals, communicate with others so that they can collaborate with others, because we live in an increasingly complex world where we have sophisticated problems that require us to collaborate with others. Having argued that students should read, write, and speak, I'd like to drill down and get closer to my three arguments. I'd like to articulate them more fully, and I'm going to start with reading. I think with regard to reading, students should absolutely read a variety of texts, and they should read high quality texts. So first of all, with variety of texts, I think that in a high school English class, students should read both fiction and nonfiction. And since students should presumably be reading nonfiction in science classes and social studies classes, in elective classes, maybe a little bit in math classes, I think that it's the responsibility and obligation of the high school English teacher to teach fiction. And I do think that freshman and sophomore years, especially, the curriculum should probably lean heavily towards fiction, maybe to the extent of 70 or 80% of the texts being fiction. Junior and senior years, we should probably pull back from that. And I do think that nonfiction should come in to weigh 40 or 50% of the curriculum in a junior or senior level class, unless it's specifically a literature class, such as advanced placement literature and composition. Having talked about nonfiction and fiction, I think fiction should, of course, break down to short stories, poetry, novels, and plays. I think that 2 or 3 longer works per semester is sufficient so long as you teach them well, and that you should do a number of those shorter works that are still sustained reading because students are reading for 30 or 45 minutes at a stretch. In terms of nonfiction, we should have a variety. There should be nonfiction books, there should be articles from newspapers and magazines, articles from the web. Students should get a good variety. And having spoken of variety, I think we should have texts that are a high quality. And I think we need high quality texts that are historical because students have been dropped into this world where the technology makes their head spin and they're very present in the now, and the now moves very fast. And our students lack historical context to understand how we've gotten to be here. And reading historical fictions is a good way for them to understand these contexts. They might learn about things that have happened in the past in their history classes, but they don't really understand those things until they read books like To Kill a Mockingbird, books like The Diary of Anne Frank, books like Heart of Darkness help students uh, who who know who know about past events actually fully understand those past events because they're explored from a more human standpoint. I'm saying high quality texts because in the last 20 years or so, there's been a movement towards a skill based curriculum. And I think that the quality of texts has gradually been reduced because we've moved from teaching specific novels that we know to be of high quality to teaching specific skills that we know are important, but we're not always teaching those skills using the highest quality texts. And so, while I wouldn't dissuade you from using lower quality texts occasionally to start building skills, I think the goal should always be to reach towards the higher quality texts so that our students can see what it is that they should be aspiring to in their own reading, in their own writing, and in their own thinking. Having spoken of teaching a variety of text and having spoken briefly on quality of texts, having spoken briefly on historical texts, and having spoken briefly on contemporary texts, I'd like to talk briefly about 3 ways that we should be teaching students to read in the classroom. And the first way we should be teaching students to read in the classroom is that they should read for main ideas and themes. Main ideas are the main points of nonfiction, and themes are the ideas expressed by fiction. And I say this, and it sounds simple, even simplistic, but I say this because a lot of students can read passages and then take assessments and prove that they don't know what those passages are about. I think there are a couple reasons for this. And the first one has to do with we teachers. I think that a lot of teachers, having taught skill based curricula where we uh, narrowly look for students to execute on specific skills, I think that we're frequently worksheeting our students through texts, and students are learning to skim texts to find answers, and they're not reading completely to find ideas. Second, I think that teachers, under a lot of pressure to move quickly through texts and move quickly through their curriculum, they are not giving the students the time that students need to wrestle with texts appropriately. And so when students come back to class and haven't done the reading or they haven't done the reading sufficiently, teachers feeling the pressure to move don't let the students figure out what the passage was about, but rather the teachers will just tell them. And so students gradually learn that they don't have to read, they don't have to wrestle with meaning, because the teacher will just tell them what the text means when they get to class. And because of that, we are failing in the basic fundamental expectation that we teach students to read and understand texts. After we teach students to read for main ideas and for themes, the second thing we should do with students is that we should teach them to zoom out and look at structure. Students need to understand that texts are not just little written dreams that we enter and words wash over us for a little while and then we come out of it and we've grasped some things from that wash, but a lot of it has just flown by. Students need to see that texts are specifically planned so that they can specifically plan and write their own texts. This means with nonfiction, we talk about introduction paragraphs, we talk about body paragraphs, we talk about conclusion paragraphs. We may bring in transitions. We may talk about language like anecdote, background, exposition, statistics, facts. Some of these texts might have text boxes and text features that we should go over. On the fiction side, we should teach students about Freytag's triangle. We should teach students to try to chunk texts and break them between their scenes so that they can understand the component parts and how these parts compare and contrast or juxtapose to one another to create their effects. Having zoomed out to look at structure, the third thing that we should do with students is that we should teach them to zoom in and we should look at the close reading. This is where we look at specific word choice. This is where we look at how punctuation plays an effect. This is where we look at figurative language such as symbolism, metaphor, similes, hyperbole, personification. And we look at how the small, granular, individual choices that writers make help those writers to achieve the effects that they achieve. So if we can take our students and we can teach them to read for main ideas and themes, teach them to zoom out to understand structure, and teach them to zoom in to understand how the small choices help convey the overall message, I think that we're largely successful as high school English teachers. Just to stack maybe one or two more things on top of that, in the modern world, we need to work really hard with our students on the difference between fact and opinion. A lot of people in our society are having trouble discerning the difference between fact and opinion, especially when people sharing their opinions are speaking very loudly or very angrily or very slyly. And so we need to understand that. Secondly, we need to help students understand bias and persuasion at a deeper level. Students need to read persuasive texts and understand how the persuasion is taking place so that they can write their own persuasive texts. But maybe more importantly, they need to recognize when people are trying to persuade them and they need to recognize the often slippery techniques that people are using to persuade them because these techniques are parting our students with their money and their votes in ways that our students will not be happy with in the long run. At the very highest level of reading, I think we get into subtlety. And subtlety is when we can talk to our students and help them understand how tone impacts things, how irony takes place, how juxtaposition is made use of. And these things are trickier, they're more difficult. I've seen some research that argues that the brain isn't developed for this kind of abstract reasoning or subtle understanding until students are 16 or 17 or 18. So maybe these things are better for the junior and senior level teachers. And the freshman and sophomore teachers need to lay groundwork so that the junior and senior level teachers can do them. Having spoken on reading, I'd like to talk about writing. I think that writing is actually the most important part of the high school English curriculum. There are a lot of teachers in the building who are helping students learn to read, offering them opportunities to read, but no one in the building is going to be doing as much to help students write as high school English teachers. And if it weren't that reading were necessary in order to teach students how to write, I would say that writing was absolutely the most important part of the high school English curriculum. To rephrase that, throughout the school year, you're going to run into a number of places where your curriculum will feel a little bit soft and you're going to be teaching things and you're not really going to be sure what your goal ought to be. And in those cases, you should think, my goal is to teach students how to write. And if you do that, you will produce more productive, more effective high school students who are better off in their future lives. In teaching students how to write, I think At the very baseline, we have to start with essential grammar. And when I teach essential grammar, I always start with the question, what is a complete sentence? I do this with freshmen, I do it with sophomores, I do it with juniors, I do it with seniors. You would be surprised how many seniors don't know what a complete sentence is. We move from complete sentences to the way that complete sentences are combined using periods or semicolons or commas and coordinating conjunctions. And from there, we move into more sophisticated punctuation, including commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, parentheses. I help my students learn how to vary their writing using varied punctuation and varied sentence lengths. Having talked about structure when we're doing reading, we zero in on structure and writing especially. When we write in a number of modes. Students should write in narrative mode. Narrative mode, I think, fell off a lot after the turn of the century when there was a movement towards the standards-based testing and there was a big movement towards persuasive writing, especially in a lot of places. And I think that now, in an era where students have so much access to technology and so much access to artificial intelligence, narrative writing is becoming more important in a very large way. Students live and understand their lives in narrative ways. And if we can help our students to write narratives, they can examine and better understand their own lives and the lives of people around them. We should also write informational texts that are not argumentative. We should write descriptive texts. We should write texts that are evaluative, where students choose criteria and evaluate things based on those criteria. We should have students write analytical texts, where students break things down to explain how those things work. And students should, of course, write synthesis texts, where they take other things and they put them together. This is most commonly done in research writing. Students should absolutely learn how to read and pull quotes for evidence. They should learn how to include evidence in papers. This is tricky. Having students introduce evidence, include evidence, and then comment on that evidence or analyze that evidence or explain that evidence is very important. And students should, in all of these varied forms that they're writing in, they should experiment with different structures, and they should, of course, experiment with different structures, having looked at high quality writers use those structures on their own. The final thing that you should really emphasize in your high school English class is that students should speak. And ideally, you have all of your students speaking every day, 2 or 3 times a day. If you want to cheat a little bit and have one of these things be them saying hello to you at the door, I don't blame you. Class sizes have gotten large. I try and call on all of my students every day. I don't always get there. I often fail. But trying to call on every student to keep them engaged so that they know they have a voice, so they practice using that voice is important. Students should do these small pair share discussions. They should move from pair share to group share in groups of 4 or 5 or 6. Students should present in groups that are collaborative, in which everyone in the group is expected to present. They should present in groups that are pairs, in which both members of the group share evenly. And as I said earlier, I really do think that in the modern world, if not freshmen and sophomores, then absolutely juniors and seniors should be putting together electronic presentations. I like to do this with one, book talks where students read a book and then they watch several book talk videos and then they produce their own book talk video. And two, summaries of research where students, having written a research paper, then present their research finding in some kind of technology assisted presentation in which their face does appear using some kind of technology, such as Screencast-O-Matic. Close listeners will have recognized that there are a few things that I didn't mention in this video. One of them is standardized testing strategies. I don't know that we should spend a lot of time working on standardized testing strategies in our high school English classes. I try not to assign multiple choice work to my students unless it's simple quizzing. And really, I've found that short answer quizzing has been more effective for proving that my students have done the reading than multiple choice quizzing has. I don't do multiple choice tests in my class. I do written tests in my class because students have so many opportunities to practice multiple choice elsewhere. Again, I feel that there's so few opportunities for students to practice writing that if I don't offer them the opportunities, then their high school career slips by and they haven't had those opportunities. And to that end, at the end of a longer work like a book or a play, I'm disinclined to give some kind of summative test, and I'm more inclined to have the students write a paper to prove what they've learned. The other thing that I haven't mentioned here is technology. And I'm afraid I'm a bit of a Luddite. I would be very happy to just teach a class where I used a couple of whiteboards and some dry erase markers in my pocket, and the students read books and wrote on paper using pens and pencils. Too frequently, when administrators tell us they want us to use technology in the classroom, teachers veer towards the superficial bells and whistles of technology, and students do superficial work that uses technology in superficial ways. The one or two ways that I would enthusiastically embrace technology in my classroom are databases for research and the use of video for filming productions. I suppose as a distant third place, I would say the word processor can be nice. I'm becoming wary of the word processor ever since the artificial intelligence extensions have started to become so prevalent that so many students can do so much writing in which they're not really doing any thinking at all. Because, again, as I've mentioned before, I think we need to teach students how to write because we need to teach students how to think. And if students can't organize their writing, it's proof that they can't organize their thinking, and that's going to be a liability for them in their lives. That's my video today. I'd be happy to get feedback from you. If you are a new teacher who has questions or comments, I'd love to read them. I'd love to give you some answers or some feedback. If you are a veteran teacher who has ideas of your own or disagreements with me, you know that I love uh, productive, constructive disagreement because I think it helps everyone grow and learn. Thank you guys so much. Happy teaching.